StreamYard. All right, we're live, but we're not live. This is that little extra bonus content for people that are watching on YouTube. This is where, like, this is where we should have done the Charlie update, right? Like, this is the content people really come for. It's a Charlie update.
Yeah.
But maybe we'll bring up Charlie in the show. Maybe we won't. We'll see how the topics where it takes us here on the couch, everybody. Let's go live. Was Kenny Golladay overpaid? That and more this week on the couch. Matt Harmon, all things wide receiver. Let's start with the biggest thing of the last month or so. Kenny Golladay, Giants. What grade do you give this?
Yeah, I thought this was a good signing. So for a couple different things here, it's an interesting discussion with Golladay. Like, for one, Sigmund, and of course, thank you for having me on the couch. Always appreciate it. Always good to feel the comfy cushions are still right intact. I think everyone's couch cushions, maybe I'll speak for just my household here. Everyone's couch cushions during the pandemic feel a little looser. That is definitely a discussion point around the house. It's like, so when are we getting a new couch? I'm like, this one feels still relatively new to me. But anyways, whole nother topic. With the Giants and Kenny Golladay, so if I was a smarter man, I would have realized this like the moment that I started charting receivers for reception perception, which was about 7 to 8 years ago now. Wow, time really does fly. I would have realized that by spending all this time with wide receivers, I'm inherently spending a lot of time with quarterbacks. And the more that you learn about the wide receivers and the way that they operate, the more you learn about what a quarterback likes. The example that I always give, there's two examples I actually always give. Like Jared Goff and Cooper Kupp were such a good tandem because Jared Goff is a very, like he wants to see it there. And Cooper Kupp, he's not a tight window guy. Like Jared Goff is not going to be rifling in, these passes into tight windows. He wants to see a guy come open. And the way that Cooper Kupp is lined up against zone coverage so much is that slot receiver in those 2019-2018 Rams offenses made sense that he jived well with him. Derek Carr and Michael Crabtree. Michael Crabtree was never really a fit for the player that Colin Kaepernick had become by the time that 2015 season had rolled around, but a very timing anticipatory passer made sense for a Michael Crabtree. So you start to learn, what type of receivers a quarterback likes or works well with just based on who they thrive with and who doesn't thrive with them. When it comes to Daniel Jones, I kept saying this, like entering into free agency as we're trying to make matchmaker to a wide receiver to the Giants. I don't really know yet what Daniel Jones' strengths are as a passer. Like he's tough. He's a really good runner. Mm-hmm. Those things I think you can Daniel Jones will stand in the pocket and he will take a hit, sometimes to a fault. That's why he's got the fumbling problem. But as a pure passer, I'm still not quite sure like what his strengths are. You can take that comment for what it is, right. So it's like what wide receiver fits well with him. I do think that a wide receiver like Kenny Golladay, who is a big physical down the field guy, people talk, I just tweeted this out this morning, actually, in a link to his reception perception profile. People talk about Kenny Golladay like he is a Kelvin Benjamin type separator. I don't think that's the case. I think that actually undersells the growth that Kenny Golladay has happened to him as a player. In his first 2 years, he was definitely just a big contested catch, red zone vertical threat. But I think over the last 2 years, especially in 2019, when he didn't have all the injury issues, he showed in reception perception, that he's about a 74th percentile separator. Like that's pretty good. That's obviously a way above average type of guy against man coverage. I think when he's healthy, he's pretty good at getting off the line of scrimmage against press. So I don't know that Golladay, I wouldn't call him right now a true number one receiver, but I think he's right on that fringe. And I think had he been healthy in all of 2020, it didn't play in such a chaotic environment with the Detroit Lions, I might have been saying that at the end of the 2020 season because that's how good his 2019 season was. So I don't think he was overpaid. I think it is definitely the type of finishing move you'd like to put on an offense that does have good wide receivers in Darius Slayton. I think Slayton's a great Marvin Jones-esque number two receiver. Like he's a really good, I wouldn't want him as a one, but I think he's a good two. I think Shepard is still such an underrated, talented slot receiver. Like that's a great trio right there. You got Saquon Barkley, Evan Ingram, like some of these guys that haven't quite hit to their full potential yet, but like that's a good trio of wide receivers to start with. And it does just kind of come back to the quarterback. He's got a lot of different talents to work with in that room right now.
Yeah, this is a huge year for Daniel Jones because then next, fifth year option decision is going to come up and so on. You lay it out well, and I think that listening to your objective data. By the way, folks, I'll just say part of the reason that Matt Harmon is here is because Reception Perception. It's time. ReceptionPerception.com. You know it. You love it. That's why we started out with the big wide receiver story. We'll talk a lot of different wide receiver things, but check it out, folks. If you're listening, you probably already know about it. Of course, like the scary part of this, Matt, is Jason Garrett. Diego brought it up in the chat room, and it's like
I know,
because you lay it out, and I love that you said Darius Slayton's good. Darius Slayton is good. He was maybe number one. There could be like reception perception awards, Matt. Like who got the most separation for nothing? That was.
I love that idea. Yeah,
like Darius Slayton's high on that list last year. Like how many times does the guy have to put his hand up? Like, hey, I'm here.
Yeah.
Oh no. And of course, there's offensive line too. So there's two potential critical points of failure here: Jason Garrett, and we'll see about the offensive line. But my oh my, with those pieces, with Golladay and Slayton and Shepard and Ingram, and even a competent Kyle Rudolph and Saquon Barkley, you should be able to put opposing secondaries in a bind. You should be able to run with the Ryan Fitzpatrick football team that we'll talk about and the Cowboys to win this division. We'll see. Another thing you mentioned just in passing about Kenny Golladay that I wonder about for a lot of the players, I wonder if we're going to see a post Matt Patricia bounce like we see the post Gase bounce. Well, really,
right?
Because it sounds like everybody was miserable. It sounds like everybody on that team was just miserable. And you just wonder whether they're still in Detroit or elsewhere, whether you're going to see a bounce like what the Jets did signing Jared Davis.
Yeah, I was just thinking that's a good example.
Yeah. Like, is there going to be something where it's the players aren't used right, everyone's miserable, everybody just gives up, and you turn the page and things can get better. As a big picture thing, I want to ask you about before we jump into more individual topics. What do you think about how the wide receiver free agent market, with the exception of Kenny Golladay, who got what he was looking for after all,
right?
What do you think of how it's been received? What do you think is going on here behind the scenes in the league that are making the wheels turn this way? Is it going to be a blip just because of the cap? Is there something bigger going on here? Thoughts?
So a couple different things here. There was sort of a discussion that when the wide receiver market sort of was a slow trickle, these guys weren't quite getting the deals that they wanted, whatever. And then, you saw Allen Robinson sign the franchise tag. You saw Chris Godwin sign his franchise tag tender. And, the discussion around that was, well, they saw what the market was out there for wide receivers. And they were like, we better lock in that payday right now. Well, number one, those teams were not going to rescind the franchise tag on these guys and send them out into the open market or, there was any sort of concern about their payday. Number two, Kenny Golladay is a great point. Like, Kenny Golladay is not the player that Allen Robinson or Chris Godwin is. To me, there was a tier separation between those two guys at the top of the available market and then Kenny Golladay as that third guy in the beginning of tier number two. But still, he got the payday that he was looking for. Like you said, he was able to eschew, like, okay, Bengals, you're offering me a 1-year deal. I don't care. I'm going to go get paid here by the Giants. Like, great players, teams find a way to pay those guys. And Chris Godwin and Allen Robinson, I think, are clear top 10 receivers. I think Robinson has an argument to be considered top 5, top 8. I think those guys could be, like, I know Chris Godwin has plenty of great receivers in the offense with him, but he could be a team's one. You could funnel a passing game through Chris Godwin or Allen Robinson. So to me, they were sort of like, I didn't think that had anything to do with the fact that the market was slower for wide receivers or whatever, because there's still a difference between the glut at the position. And we'll talk about the glut at the position too, because there is a legitimate overflow of great wide receivers in the league right now. There's a difference between those guys and the Allen Robinsons, the Devontae Adams, the DeAndre Hopkins, Stephon Diggs. That's why there's still a premium placed on those players. So I think if Robinson had hit the market, he would have gotten a big-time deal. If Godwin hit the market, he would have gotten a big-time deal, because teams will still find a way, no matter whether there's the cap squeeze, anything else, whether there's an overstock of wide receivers, to pay great talent. It really is just that simple sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think though what we are seeing here is this free agency class is a great representation of the league as a whole. Like all of these guys after Kenny Golladay, and Will Fuller is kind of on this fringe too with Kenny Golladay, but he has a lot of other baggage beyond just where he is as a player. Corey Davis, Juju Smith-Schuster, Curtis Samuel, all of these players that were at that next tier of free agency in terms of the wide receivers, these are all great number twos. Like these are guys that you want as your second fiddle, but they should never be the top receiver of your offense. And I think all of these guys have proven that at this point. Like Davis has tried and failed as a number one. He's a good number two. Juju has tried and failed as a number one. That's why he goes back to Pittsburgh. I think that makes a ton of sense. But that's the league as a whole right now, Sig. Like we all knew this 2020 class of rookies was going to be really good, but the 2019 class provided us with the legit stars of today and tomorrow. And 2018 was really underrated too, with guys like Cortland Sutton that people forget about, DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, Michael Gallup. Like that class brought a ton of great options too. So right now, the league is just stocked with good wide receivers. So I think you have a lot of GMs that are looking at, okay, do I pay Juju Smith-Schuster $16 million a year? Or do I just go try to find the next Juju in the draft and get him on a cost-controlled contract for 4 years? And I think that's the way the teams are looking at that. And to me, that does make a lot of sense just with the history of what we've seen out of the league in terms of the draft the last couple of years and the way that this class probably stacks up as well.
So one of the things that I've said when the subjects come up, Matt, is I always harken back to about 15 years ago when we said running back by committee is coming and it's going to shake up fantasy football because stud running back was basically the orthodoxy in fantasy football drafting. It's why we have PPR fantasy football. It was kind of a response to that. And then different teams, one by one, and of course the Patriots were one of the first, segmented out the work in the backfield so that you didn't need one guy to do everything. Not that there aren't still some guys that are one guy that can do everything, but you don't need that guy. And it became more of a specialized position. And also, I think you're right to bring up the influx of talent in the last few years. Because there was a while there that being a first-round receiver was associated with bad things. Corey Coleman and John Ross and Corey Davis has done okay. But the point is, for a while, there's first-round receivers, but now not just first-round receivers, but just second and third-round receivers, the influx of talent. But it makes me want to ask you a question. Do you need to have a number one wide receiver now in the NFL?
Well, Kyle Shanahan was kind of ahead of this curve where he said that, I think when he got to the 49ers, or maybe it was a couple years into that tenure, where he basically said, when you have a Julio Jones, it's great. You make every bit of use of that player and maximize a truly elite number one receiver, the very rare group of guys that are coverage dictating, win at all levels of the field. That's a small handful of players. There's only a few guys every year that do that. Jones is obviously one. There's several other guys that you would fit into that mold too. It's great when you have that player, but he was kind of saying you don't need one. You can have a confluence of players that come together and win in a variety of different ways. I think the Giants, if you don't consider Kenny Golladay as a number one receiver, now they're sort of building that mold where you have a big vertical deep threat that wins in contested areas. You have that classic good number two receiver in Darius Slayton that can win on slants, can win outside, can win on vertical patterns as well. You have a great slot receiver in Sterling Shepard, but you may not have a true number one, even though, again, Golladay is kind of an interesting breaking point in that discussion, right there on that fringe of that player. Now, I think that that's true, though. I think that it does help a lot to have that number one receiver. You can flow a passing game through that guy, but I do think you can cobble together a receiving core of really strong number two receivers as long as they complement each other. You don't want to get into a position where all of these guys sort of they all are redundant or there's an overlap of skill sets. I think Carolina last year had a really good trio of guys that won in different ways and complemented each other to the point that I think last year in Carolina, they could have put DJ Moore in Curtis Samuel's position and felt really good about that. They could have put Robbie Anderson in DJ Moore's position and felt really good about that. They could have put Curtis Samuel in Robbie Anderson's position and felt really good about that. The Pittsburgh Steelers, I think those guys are a little more defined. They're not quite as versatile, but like this year, that trio of Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, and Juju now back there, that's really good because those guys all sort of complement each other well. They do different things. Like Johnson's that route runner that separates at all levels. And I think he's probably their best receiver, but Claypool could take another step. He's a big vertical threat, downfield guy. Juju's the cleanup, does the dirty work in the slot, wins against zone coverage. You can build that sort of receiver core all through. Those guys are all second, third round draft picks. Like you can definitely build a receiver core that way as long as you understand. I think this is what the Steelers are really good at. Understanding deployment and the way guys can fit into certain roles. More so, like they don't have a skeleton key when it comes to scouting wide receivers, but I think what they're really good at is like deploying guys in the right way that best fits their skill set. You can definitely build a receiver core without a number one using that sort of method.
Yeah, absolutely. I love your point about Carolina. I never thought of that until you said it, but you're absolutely right. That Carolina could have done like a little spinorama and switched up roles for those guys, and it still would have worked. And we'll see what happens. I'll fast forward to that real quick. Let's Matt, let's travel into the future for a year, just really quick. James Washington just got signed to a free agent deal. We're going to say cheap and good deal, and he's going to be good. Yeah.
Yeah, I like James Washington. I kind of was looking forward to seeing how the Steelers would have deployed these guys without Juju this year. And I do think for Juju, it's great going back to Pittsburgh. And I think it's probably a fine thing for them too. Like, no, why not run it back? Like,
sure.
I wouldn't have wanted to pay Juju a bunch of money, but giving him a 1-year deal that's pretty cost controlled for the team makes a ton of sense. Like, I totally would have hated Juju signing with the Eagles, right? That was the other team that was that was in the mix for him, because then is he your top passing game threat? Like, is Jalen Reagor going to take that next step? There's a lot of questions there. This is probably a much more comfortable position for Juju to be in, even if we got a lot of questions about Ben Roethlisberger. But I was excited to see, like, all right, so we get back to that deployment question again. Where would they have lined up Deontay Johnson? Where would they have put James Washington? Where would they have put Chase Claypool, like at the ZX slot? Like, this stuff really matters when it comes to projecting players. We just don't talk about it. Like, we basically talk about, is a guy an outside receiver or is he slot receiver? Well, there's a lot of a deeper conversation that has to go on beyond just that. So I do think that would have been interesting. I think maybe we'll see James Washington move on to another team, or maybe come back to the Steelers on a cost-controlled basis, and then he and Juju both hit the market. I don't know. I do like James Washington. I think we should be interested in his next spot for sure.
Yeah, exactly. He's going to be underrated because the production won't be there, but I think the game's there. Okay, let's get back on the topics of the moment. The new free agency. Real quick, too, I want to say, I don't want to put you on the spot. I don't ever like to do that. Well, maybe occasionally to have some fun with you on that. But I know that you've already, like you said, the Kenny Golladay numbers are out there. Is Chase Claypool going to be one of the 2021 perception guys?
Oh, he'll definitely be out there.
Okay.
So basically this year, and this is sort of something that we're still working on in terms of the actual release of prospects. But in when I worked with the footballers and doing their draft kit, everything was kind of a one-time data dump, like in the beginning of June. But what I really want to do with this site, like once we go to the premium, like paywall comes up after this like free trial period, want to sort of put together a model of like a slow trickle out of players as opposed to just like, hey, sometime in summer, you're going to get all of the guys that I charted this year. I think it makes sense to, like, this is perfect. Put the free agents out now. Put rookies. Rookies will be back this year. Put those guys out right before the draft. Put the 2020 guys, Chase Claypool, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson. Some of those guys are already done, but like throw those out in May, like as a teaser for folks, especially for dynasty players who want to get sort of an early access before, the training camp hype bubble starts to pop for guys or whatever. So that's sort of the model for the new site is we want to slowly trickle out players so that you're kind of getting a steady stream of content as opposed to just a 1-day waiting period, because I'm not as exciting as a guy like Matt Waldman where folks are going to be.
You don't have a holiday yet.
Yeah. I don't have a holiday, and maybe what I want, Matt gets to have his 1 day. I'll like try to own several days on the calendar. We'll see how that works out.
Yeah. So, and by the way, folks, again, perception.com, free for now, for at least
for now.
another week or so. If you don't know about it, if you do know about it, then you're going to get your pre-order in, or otherwise be ready. Subscribe, get on the mailing list, all those good things. Okay, let's pick back up with free agents. And I think the way you handled Allen Robinson and Godwin, not that they've changed teams, but they were players at a decision point. Their teams were at a decision point. Let's talk about Will Fuller, because he ends up signing a 1-year deal. And like you said, there's flaws, there's blemishes, the durability, but that doesn't necessarily play at all into what perception is looking at, which is the player. And in fact, even though his suspension overshadowed his season, he was coming on. Now, I love that you brought up Daniel Jones in the discussion of Kenny Golladay, because it's really difficult if we're just talking about fantasy football production or even just NFL success, and we look back at these signings and say it was a good signing or a bad signing. The quarterback is a big part of that. The offensive coordinator is a big part of that, the play caller. But still, we can, so Tua, that's a little bit more of an unknown, but we can start to project how he's going to fit into this offense. And we can say, is it something we may look back on that because of those questions, the Miami may have gotten a good deal here to bring him in as a shot in the arm for this offense?
Yeah, I love this signing because it's 1 year. Like, if it doesn't work out, who cares? But focusing on the player that Will Fuller is, I always thought Will Fuller was good, a great number 2 receiver. What he does, and what he does is really valuable. Like, even if his overall success rates in reception perception in his first few years weren't great, you parse out the route tree metrics and you see where he wins is downfield on those curl patterns. That's what you want as a vertical threat. You want to be able to snap back to the quarterback and present that wide window when a defense gives you cushion. But this past year was a breaking point for Fuller, where I think he was deployed, used, asked to be an alpha number 1 receiver, and crushed it. A 74% success rate versus press, like that's at the 78th percentile. He stepped into DeAndre Hopkins' vacated X receiver spot and was very good. He was good all year, basically. Like, anyone that had Will Fuller in fantasy knows that he was crushing it all year. And that wasn't just Deshaun Watson. That wasn't just playing in that offense that was usually trailing. Like, that definitely added to the production part of it. But I think he legitimately took a different step as a player last year. You hate to ask whether, I don't even like people that want to immediately write off, like, oh, well, he was suspended for PEDs. Like, that was basically the only reason. Like, maybe that was the only reason he stayed healthy. We don't know that, but that is an unanswerable question. That is a question where we don't know the answer to that. What we do know is that it is a variable that you kind of have to discuss, but not make a definitive decision on. And the most important thing, though, is that he did take that step as a player. And, I think Miami, just take Tua out of it for a second and just look at their pass catching core. I think Parker is a really good jump ball receiver. He's not a good separator, whether across the route tree. Definitely can be used in the vertical game, definitely can be used in the quick slant game, but he's not a guy that's going to win at all levels. That's why it was always easy to see him struggling with a player like Tua, who I think is more of that timing anticipatory passer, wants to see guys open, wants to work in that way. I think that there's a chance that Fuller and Parker really complement each other well. So I like the signing a lot. I think it makes sense for them. I think that Tua can work really well on slant patterns that Fuller crushed it on last year. Those intermediate dig routes where, he can break into the middle of the field. Even those curl patterns on the shorter routes that Fuller crushed it on last year. I think Tua could be a good fit there, and a guy who will actually get separation, where Parker, that is really definitely not the strength of his game.
And you bring up the idea of the complementary pieces. In Miami, this could be fun, right? With Parker and Fuller, Lynn Bowden, who started to show some signs last year. And we'll see about Preston Williams. I feel so bad for Preston Williams. Really.
Yeah, I know. It's a bummer.
It is. But, he's going to have to get back from that Achilles and win playing time now. Although first game of the year, Fuller's still suspended. But you make me want to go put trade offers in my dynasty leagues for Fuller right now. With that, the reception perception stamp of approval.
And odds are he probably doesn't play. I would bet that he doesn't play for Miami in 2022 because like
Right.
if things go well, right? Like because then he's on a 1-year deal. He's ready to hit the market again next year. Like I think he's the perfect 1-year deal player because if he does suffer another injury or 2020 was just an outlier, like who cares? For Miami's sake, it was a risk worth taking. And I think that gives them the chance to like have the offense be more of a blank slate next year, because Fuller's gone. If Fuller didn't work out, odds are Tua probably didn't work out. You know, like we can really just come back here in 2022 and sort of blank slate this thing. Parker's probably at a point where you can move on from him. That's a bit scary if you're looking into the abyss and it's staring right back at you if you're Miami at that point. But it is something to kind of consider that they can really reset this thing if it doesn't work in the 1-year fashion that they have kind of Tua on that shorter leash and Fuller actually signed to just 1 year.
Yeah, I like what Miami is doing from the sense that it looks like, with the exception of the Kyle Van Noy, I don't know what happened there, but they have a plan and they're sticking to it. Like they're true to their plan. And like you said, the idea is let's give this offense a whirl with Tua. Let's give him a real shot to succeed. And if it doesn't work, they'll be ready to institute another plan. And certainly Will Fuller can be the missing piece. And I also want to see what they're going to do at running back, because the word was like they only had a $2 or $3 million budgeted for running back in free agency. I don't know if that was before or after the Aaron Jones signing. They bring in Malcolm Brown.
Leak that one after you don't get Aaron Jones. Like leak that one afterwards. Yeah, it's like well, we were only budgeting just a little. We were never that. We were never
really that into the running back market. Now, do they draft a running back? They have 4 picks in the top 50. Do they draft a running back, or they really maybe have absorbed this idea that the running backs don't matter? That the offense creates production for the running back, and just a competent running back, Myles Gaskin is competent, can harvest that production. Anyway, turning the page. How's Corey Davis going to look without defenses focused on A.J. Brown and Derrick Henry, with all, again, the Jets offense and who's the quarterback aside? Corey Davis, maybe. I know it was an early signing. The early signings in free agency look bad in terms of money, but if he can play, it won't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter with the money part of it, whatever. I thought this was about the range he'd get paid. I really was hoping that Davis would go to a place where he could, again, resume that really strong number 2 receiver role. Because, it's funny, Sig, like last year, if you had looked at the Titans, I say this all the time, but I think it's worth mentioning. Like if you had looked at the Titans receiving core and you were told one of these guys was a top 5 pick in the NFL draft, and he was like everyone agreed. Right. Everyone agreed when this guy came in the league that he was the best receiver in the class and he was going to be a stud, whether you use like analytics models, just watched him play. Everyone agreed this guy was going to be freaking good. And then you looked at the other guy, like, okay, the other guy was a 2nd-round pick who did a lot of dirty work in college, is a physical player, played a lot of slot receiver, was that classic number 2 to another college all-star. You would have said that A.J. Brown was a top 5 pick and Corey Davis was that rugged guy, but it was actually the other way around. I think Corey Davis is great at that stuff. Good blocker, rugged player, like wins at the catch point, physical against zone coverage and getting separation. Like, I think he's a very, very good number 2 receiver. So I think the question is going to sort of be asked, like, what does Denzel Mims do? Because I think Mims can be an X receiver. Like, you want him winning on the outside against press. You want him winning down the field in contested areas. And I think there were some good small flashes from Mims in a really, really awful situation last year. So, now they have Keelan Cole as well. Will he bring that speed element? I think you like Keelan Cole as a rookie. Oh, yeah. I like Keelan Cole too. Like, I think he's an underrated player. He actually had some moments last year when everyone was trying to make Laviska Shenault happen, that it was actually Keelan Cole being that guy when DJ Chark went down. So I think that was an underrated good signing for them. So if you don't put the Corey Davis as a number 1 receiver expectations on him, I think this is a good signing, especially because of the offense that they're going to run. We talked about Kyle Shanahan just earlier, in his views of you don't really need a number 1 receiver. You need a complementary set of wide receivers that can win in a variety of different ways, and you scheme things up for them. that's kind of what the Jets have going for them right now. Like Corey Davis wins in different ways than Denzel Mims, Jamison Crowder or Keelan Cole or any of these. I don't think Crowder's going to end up being on the roster or whatever, but like, Keelan Cole is a guy that he wins in different ways from the other two players. So they're sort of slowly building that model. They just had to pay Corey Davis a lot of money to be that player, but like, whatever, if you have the money, who cares? It's not my cash. It doesn't matter to me what they pay Corey Davis.
And the Jets, I just hung out with our mutual friend Matt Patonti for a little while this morning, and he's a Jets fan. It's like a curse if you're a Jets fan. And he was talking about how like the Jets have trouble getting up to the salary cap floor sometimes. So like they still have like $40 million. And that's with Crowder and his 10.375 salary still on the roster. So yeah, the Jets. But as you mentioned earlier with Kyle Shanahan, because the idea is, I think one criticism might be, well, Corey Davis, Denzel Mims, these guys aren't number ones. Keelan Cole, Jamison Crowder, whoever. But you have the Kyle Shanahan offense probably coming along with Mike LaFleur, and again, we'll see who runs that offense. Curtis Samuel's really good, and I want to give some love to Curtis Samuel and talk about Curtis Samuel, and think that Curtis Samuel's value is probably at worst like level with what it was last we saw him, if not up. Mm-hmm. But really, I just want to say how much fun is it going to be to watch Terry McLaurin with Ryan Fitzpatrick? How excited, how much nothing. The only thing that would have made me happier maybe is if Philip Lindsay signed with the Steelers. The Texans? Really? The Texans?
Yeah, I know. Why?
What, man? I don't know. It's like I think he needs to run uphill. Like he needs everything to be Mount Everest. And becoming a good player on the Texans right now is probably Mount Everest. But Ryan Fitzpatrick to Terry McLaurin, is this going to like break reception perception?
Let's hope. I mean, I've got the question on the board behind me over there. Like, am I a Washington fan now? Is that what has to happen?
You're a 49ers fan. You're officially a 49ers fan, right?
Well,
or was that just for 1 year?
I was a lifelong fan for 1 year. So I actually didn't do the exercise last year. So because couldn't shoot a show because I'm not shooting an entire show from my iPhone,
right?
in my own house. So it seemed a little stupid to do the show again. But this year probably won't happen either. Maybe it's just sometimes, Sig, it's not, the art is not knowing what is a good bit and what's a bad bit. Sure. It's knowing when to let the good bit go. So maybe that bit is over for now. But I mean, look, I'm from the Northern Virginia area. I rejected the Washington team my entire life.
And now they're the football team too.
Now they're the football team.
They're the football team.
Which is literally, I mean, I love it. I think they should keep Washington football team. Like just lean into that. Like that's better than kind of trying to, I don't know, make good on the fact that you had a racist name for all those years. Like just lean into the fact, like, we're a football team.
There's lots of soccer teams that are the FC. I mean, just the football club,
exactly. Like Washington FT is kind of fun. It's very close to like WTF when you write it out. And I think there's going to be a lot of WTF, like good and bad moments with the Ryan Fitzpatrick experience, because that's what the Ryan Fitzpatrick experience is. I think this is a perfect signing for Washington, the Fitzpatrick thing, because like, I don't think Ron Rivera is a guy that wants to like start grooming a rookie quarterback right now. Like when you have a defense like this, you have to strike when the iron's hot. I think Rivera probably knows that based on how quickly those Panthers defenses changed. Like they had a great unit at some times over the years, but things change quickly when like defense is not stable year to year. Like they're not going to have all of these guys around, but I love that, you have sort of almost like in a weird way, how we talk about like rookie quarterback contracts, like building up around them. That defensive line right now is kind of on their rookie quarterback contract, right? Like Jonathan Allen he's going to come up at some point, but Montez Sweat, Chase Young, like those guys are young. They're not up for extensions yet. So they pay William Jackson on the back end. I really liked that signing. And I think that's a good way to sort of work the defense part of it. And then when it comes to your offense, get the veteran like Fitzpatrick and just make it weird, right? Like I think that they're going to have a competition between him and Taylor Heineke, who's like almost sort of Ryan Fitzpatrick at the beginning of Ryan Fitzpatrick's journey, which is just, he's a reckless guy that throws his body around. That's why Taylor's always hurt. He's a small player. I've got a lot of experience watching Taylor Heineke from like the ODU days. I was actually there at ODU where my sister went to college. She's the same year as Taylor Heineke was. I was there for his first ever action in relief of a senior his freshman year at ODU. So like I've seen a lot of Taylor Heineke football, and I think that makes you probably don't want that to be your starter. But I think Fitzpatrick makes a ton of sense because he can get the best out of McLaurin, Samuel, Logan Thomas, like Antonio Gibson, to the point that now if you weren't able to get Matthew Stafford, and I think they were on the fringes of that conversation, I think that would have been a good spot for him. I think we even talked about this when we did the NFC East show. Like I thought that was a perfect Matthew Stafford landing spot. If you weren't able to make that happen, why not go for Fitzpatrick, who at least is going to pump some production into your offense? It's not going to necessarily he's not going to be playing winning football every single week. We know that that's just not in the range of outcomes. But from a fantasy perspective, it's fire the cannons. Like we've seen Fitzpatrick elevate Devontae Parker. He can definitely elevate a guy like Terry McLaurin. He can definitely elevate. Remember the Buccaneers year? I think this is sort of a similar situation.
Oh, yeah.
You had Mike Evans, Deshaun Jackson, and Chris Godwin like just scratching the surface of getting started there. I think that's what you've sort of got here, a low-grade version of that with Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, and Logan Thomas as well. I think we should be – it's hard not to get like too excited about this unit.
Get excited.
It's really hard.
How much fun is this question for fantasy football, right? How much was the Washington quarterback play holding back Terry McLaurin? What a fun question to answer with Terry McLaurin on your roster this year.
I compared it to in a write-up I did. I compared it sort of to the ghost of held back wide receivers Christmas future,
right?
Like Allen Robinson coming to Washington. And like, don't let Terry McLaurin, don't let him be me. Like I'm here, 27 years old, like just begging for a Ryan Fitzpatrick quarterback. Like Allen Robinson's at the point where last year we're all like gritting our teeth saying, listen, Nick Foles is the best quarterback by far that Allen Robinson has ever played with. Then like this year we're gritting our teeth. Andy Dalton is by far the best quarterback. Right. So like Ryan Fitzpatrick is definitely the best that Terry McLaurin's ever played with. But like it just, there's a huge difference between Ryan Fitzpatrick veteran competency. I mean, you even saw like when Taylor Heineke got in there, how much more alive that offense was, how much more, even when Alex Smith got in there over Dwayne Haskins, it's like Smith doesn't have anything left from a physical perspective, but man, this guy can at least run the offense. Haskins just couldn't do that for whatever reason. So yeah, I think that I'm really excited. I think Fitzpatrick is going to be flinging balls down the field to Terry McLaurin. And from a reception perception standpoint, like coming out of his rookie year, I think he was like an ascendant superstar. I think he can be a top 10 wide receiver in the league. Like a guy that I'm not asking, by the start of his second contract, like with Kenny Golladay, whether he's a fringe number one receiver. I think Terry McLaurin already is like at that level. And we're all going to know it now when Ryan Fitzpatrick throws him like 1,400 yards and 10 touchdowns.
Yeah, you know me, I'm an old man, so I'm not much on like analytics and magic numbers and stuff like that. But I think that it's something like I had it isolated like 50 catches, 800 yards, 6 touchdowns, something around those numbers. That if a player can do that in his rookie year, there's a very high chance he's going to be a great receiver. The Michael Claytons and Tampa Mike Williams and those kind of guys aside, over the last 10 years or so, everybody who's hit that threshold has gone on to be a great receiver. And we have a whole new crop of them next year. And yeah, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Washington, it's fun. How can you not root for that? And Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to make his teammates excited. Like it's exciting. I think we don't understand from the outside that it's exciting for a team to play with him, and he gets his guys like all pulling in the same direction.
You even see it with guys like everybody that you ever talk to from the Dolphins. They're always, and you ask them about Tua, it's like, yeah, Tua's great. Well, we love Fitzpatrick. Yeah. It's a little concerning for Tua that like everyone's always like, yeah, we like Tua, but Mac Jones or Ryan Fitzpatrick, like it's always but the other guy, that's a little concerning. But that's a separate discussion.
It is.
For Fitzpatrick, like everyone that's ever played for him or played with him loves him. I think like he's obviously very like the memeable quarterback. That's great. In a way, like Washington checks off two needs, right? Because they needed a starting quarterback. They also kind of need a mascot, right? Like because they're just a football team. Ryan Fitzpatrick can be the mascot there as well. Very memeable guy, but like the energy and excitement and like also the underdog mentality. Like this is a guy in Fitz who basically was telling me just a couple months ago when we were talking at the Super Bowl, virtually at the Super Bowl, that just all he wants is a chance. Like he can't be picky about where he goes. All he wants is a chance and a place to compete.
And you saw it with like Chase Young, right? Like he was so excited for Heineke. Like he was gushing about Heineke. You could just see that it brought the team so much joy when Heineke was out there because, like you said, they had a fighting chance on offense. Now they have a lot more. There's so many other things we could talk about here. I'm just gonna throw a bunch of stuff in a bucket. I'm thinking about buddy buckets. Speaking, it's March Madness time. It's fun.
Hey, I can break some news here on the live stream.
Oh, please do.
So Sammy Watkins is going to Baltimore. The Ravens have been working. He's on his way to a visit. Excuse me. All right, I just opened the full tweet.
He is going to Baltimore, not in the way that you're thinking yet.
Yeah. Hey, people are still doing visits. That's
it's a real thing. I know it's coming back, right? They're going to have to draft in person too. And hey, Watkins, like everyone's moved on for him for fantasy anyway, so it isn't like we mourn his fantasy value if he ends up in Baltimore, but he would still help Baltimore. So that's a team that we thought was going to maybe be in on some of these other receivers, and it certainly could be an answer there. Well, let's talk. It's timely because this morning there was a breaking news about Josh Reynolds to Tennessee, Corey Davis's old spot that he made very fantasy relevant. And now Johnny Smith's gone. Anthony Ferkser, speaking of Harvard guys, you got Fitzpatrick, you got Ferkser. File that away. But there's opportunity. They don't have a big time receiving running back. Lots of opportunity there for Josh Reynolds. Can he make good on it?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I like Josh Reynolds coming a lot into the NFL, like as a day 3 draft pick. I sort of thought he could win in the contested areas down the field, and he showed some of those flashes too. So, it's a 1-year deal. I think that it could easily end up being a Tajay Sharp situation where it's like, ooh, the Vikings have a very bare depth chart, right? Tajay, right. Titans connection there too. Vikings have a very bare depth chart. Like, Tajay Sharp might be their number 2 receiver, and by the time the NFL draft is over, they've added someone. So I think we could see another move for the Titans, and it's interesting because they're sort of at this crossroads again, where their strength is as an offensive team. Even if they have a defensive head coach and they have, that sort of philosophy, like add Bud Dupree in free agency, but like their strength is an offensive team. And I wonder like if they continue to juice that angle with another receiver or tight ends in the draft. We shall see.
Yeah, well, with their secondary, they had better start thinking of themselves as an offensive team.
Yeah.
Although, Bud Dupree and Harold Landry is a good place to start. But like you said, the draft looms. We'll have to do another perception visit after the draft. But sticking with the recent player movement. And I'm just going to throw all these guys in a bucket, and you just tell me who excites you the most. We're talking about veterans. Some of them were free agents because they got their release. Some of them were, free agents that play out their contract. And on that note, by the way, I just want to point this out. Someone should take this. I'd love overestimating the reach of my influence, right? I like to say someone should take this and make an article out of it. Because Marvin Jones played out a 5-year contract.
5-year deal? Yes.
That never happens anymore.
Never happens. I wrote that same thing. I wrote that same thing in his reception perception profile on the website. Yeah. It's crazy, but I think that's a perfect encapsulation of who Marvin Jones is. Like, totally quiet. Just sort of like we were talking about with Darius Slayton earlier, like wins in contested areas, wins downfield. He's not going to be like the best separator in the world, but man, like he can make big plays and just quietly, steadily plays out a 5-year contract. And like never is at a point where the team is like, you know what, we need to move on. Like he's always worth the production. He's always worth he's a super reliable guy, which I love. Maybe you're asking about Marvin Jones or whatever, but like I love him landing in Jacksonville. Like I know some people were like confused by the signing, but it's like, look, you give Trevor Lawrence a guy to come in and right away be like, all right, this is an NFL receiver. You remember Andrew Luck was like working with, it's easy to make this comparison. Wasn't Andrew Luck throwing like 120 passes to Donnie Avery in his first year? And like T.Y. Hilton was good, but T.Y. Hilton was a rookie. They came in the same year. I don't think there was any other. Listen, my memory is not that good to remember the exact Colts depth chart from 2012, but I do remember like Donnie Avery being a big part of it. Like instead of giving Trevor Lawrence a Donnie Avery type, you're giving him a Marvin Jones type, so that even if and he also has DJ Chark, obviously, right? But like your one guy here is very reliable. You know exactly what he is, and then let's see what Chark if he continues to develop. See if Laviska Shenault turns the light on or whatever. Now receiver is not this screaming need for you in the NFL draft. I loved that signing.
Yeah, I loved it too. And maybe Visca can do an impression of Curtis Samuel.
I think that would be smart.
Going back to what Curtis Samuel did at Ohio State, Urban Meyer, all the pieces always connect. And that could just turn into Marvin Jones' take, because honestly, all the other guys, the veterans, and we love Smokey. When he mentioned wanting to go to Pittsburgh, my heart jumped for a second. Like the idea, I've never bought a Steelers jersey. I just have like gotten things through giveaways and things like that.
Yeah.
But I would have bought a Smokey Brown Steelers jersey. I totally would have.
I believe it. Yeah.
I totally would have.
That's a good one too. That's a good signing. I like that by the Raiders.
It is to replace Aguilar.
It was almost weirdly like, I think other people have said this too, so this is not like a unique thought, but it's so true. The Patriots did a Raiders thing, and the Raiders did a Patriots thing, just in this one sense, because I don't love a lot of what the Raiders have done this offseason, but like the Raiders signed Aguilar last year for nothing, and then the Patriots give him all this money coming off an outlier year. But then they turn around and replace him with a veteran that when these guys are both healthy, John Brown is a much better player than Nelson Aguilar. Like that's a very Patriots thing to do. And the Patriots did the Raiders thing. So it's very funny in that way. But like, I do think Nelson Aguilar had a really good year last year. I love the way they let him be a deep threat and just unlocked him in that fashion. I think that made a ton of sense because like, Aguilar is going to make mistakes, but when he drops balls, but he's still winning 20-yard passes down the field, that's a lot better than when you're using him as a pop gun slot receiver and he drops, a 5-yard slant or whatever. Like if he's going to catch the big ones, you can live with the drops. And that's why I like him in New England too. But John Brown, I think just sliding him right into that role makes so much sense. We'll see what John Brown has left. You and I are both like from the beginning, John Brown, Smoke Brown truthers. So I will always keep the candle lit for John Brown. I think that makes a ton of sense to sign him there. That is one that I really, really like.
Yeah, and that's a good uniform too. That's a handsome uniform for John Brown.
Yeah.
The Raiders, classic. And it was funny, just as a quick aside, again, I had to bring up my friend Matt Patonti, football guys. All of your offensive line knowledge all comes through Draft Daddy, Matt Patonti himself. We were just having a chat. This is just totally apropos of nothing, Matt. Well, it's because you brought up the Raiders, or because we're talking about the Raiders. And it's funny, too, like even the Raiders fans are privy to this. And as a Jets fan, he brought this up. And I think this is also something that factors into the Chargers that we just don't totally understand, that there's the cap and all this other stuff. But there's something going on with cash, with owner cash on hand, that is skewing how these teams are managing their decisions. That whether an owner can be like rich on paper but not have a lot of cash flow, and I think that might be part of what's going on with the Raiders. We'll see.
Yep, that's what everybody seems to whisper that, and it's like your neighbor that lives above their means, basically. Like they live in a really fancy house, but the wallpaper's peeling, sort of thing. There's always more when you get old. You actually start to learn about houses and stuff like that, right? Like this is something that like 23-year-old Matt Harmon, on his first visit to the couch, couldn't have discussed. Couldn't have thought about, right? But like this is the journey we've all been on. But it is, and it's interesting because like, look, I got into football and covering football because I didn't want to work at a desk job, like figuring out people's accounting measures. I want to only know about my own finances, and that's it. That I will dedicate a lot of resources to. So I sort of like, I kind of want to understand the salary cap. I kind of want to understand teams' financial situations, but it starts to get into so many weird angles that I'm like, this is why I got into football. So I didn't have to think about this stuff. Right. But at the same time, it is interesting because this is why we have a salary cap, right? It's supposed to keep the parity of the league alive or whatever. But, when Jerry Jones can shell out all the money he wants in a cap-strapped year or whatever because he's richer than God, it becomes a problem for the guys like Mark Davis who maybe don't have that cash on hand, still live in that real nice house, right? Like they still live in they're renting that real nice house out, but some of the foundation's starting to look a little weaker on the inside.
I mean, Mark Davis can't even afford to get a decent haircut. So
this has been your domesticated man talk of the.
No, it's funny you mentioned that thing about 23-year-old Harmon, because I feel like it's like mortgage rates. Like at the time in your life that mortgage rates become something that you're actually pay attention to.
That's like a tab up here on. I've got the 3 screens. One of the tabs is definitely like always keeping an eye on Zillow there, which in the LA area is not fun to look at. By the way,
it's fun anywhere. I don't feel like it's fun anywhere. I think that all that liquid money that got dropped into the economy last year has just made things go Looney Tunes, like Top Shot and Bitcoin and real estate stocks. Like I feel like there's this giant bubble, and who knows? But what do I know? Because I'm old. I'm old. There's so many more things. I want to get in one more thing before we go off the rails, just for a few minutes. But I did want to ask you this question. And this could include David Moore, and I know that some part of your heart is still like watching the Panthers because he's getting that role in the trio. He got assigned to a sweetheart deal, but also we can talk about opportunity for now because, like you mentioned, the draft is still there. Like underrated guys. Some of my names that I like, Byron Pringle right now said it'd be the number 3 or the number 2 because McCole Hardman can't get any kind of trust there. The Colts and Campbell. I don't know. T.Y. Hilton could come back there. Michael Pittman, with Emmanuel Sanders gone. Traquan Smith could get an opportunity there for sure. Maybe Marquez Callaway. Is there anybody that your perception jeweler's eye has got you honed in on that looks like they're going to get a chance to show more of what they can do this year?
Yeah, I like looking at that Colts situation for sure. I actually think T.Y. Hilton coming back there might not be the worst thing in the world because I think T.Y. is pretty close to the end. Like he should basically only play for. Like I thought the Cardinals would have made great sense for him if they're going to move on from Larry Fitz. Don't quite get the AJ Green fit there, but like they would have made sense for like a reliable veteran guy that only can need like he has to play in the slot at this point. But you can still rip some big plays with T.Y. Hilton. Like he still had that juice from last year. I thought that would have made sense for him. But even still, even if he returns to Indianapolis, goes anywhere else, I definitely have my eye on Michael Pittman as a guy that maybe he could take that next step with Carson Wentz. Because, I'm kind of weirdly bullish on the Colts. Carson Wentz, he's always got some weird quotes. There was some flying around this morning out there too. But like, I do think that relationships really matter. You talked about like wanting to play with Ryan Fitzpatrick. We talked about the chaos in Detroit. Like anyone that's ever had a job, like it's not these guys are not numbers on a spreadsheet, right? Like they're not just fantasy football totals. They are guys like going into work every day. And if Carson Wentz really hated his life in Philly, I bet he's going to love it in India. I bet he's going to love it with Frank Reich. Like, I think that stuff really does matter. And like, I'm weirdly bullish. I love Frank Reich and love what they've built there, that I want to get in a piece on that. And I think Pittman's a good player who could be the type of guy that fits really well with Wentz. So he stuck out to me as a player that I definitely want to keep an eye on through this process.
Yeah. Carson Wentz and weird quotes. Boy, that we could do a whole hour.
A whole hour
on a starting point. Carson Wentz is one of those guys too that you hear stuff whispered about him that you don't necessarily repeat, but you think about it when you think about Carson Wentz. Okay, we just got a couple minutes before we got to always get in under an hour for editing purposes.
Of course.
Long story. Look, you trust in Cecil. We always trust in Cecil. Hey, Cecil, we love you. I guess, and you and I know each other so well that when I go off the rails with you, because sometimes what's fun for me about off the rails is I get to learn more about somebody. But I kind of want to, I don't know why, but you mentioned LA and you mentioned the LA real estate market. So this is where I'm going to go with this. Okay. Because it's wild because you and I have been talking over the years a lot, both on and off the air. And I know that when you moved out to LA to do NFL.com, like I think you've done a really incredible job, because my feeling about LA when I've been in LA is always like it'll either agree with you and soar you to the greatest heights, or it'll make you like want to commit suicide. And I feel like you've been able to walk that tightrope there where you've remained like with your feet on the ground. I'm mixing my metaphors here in a terrible way, but at the same time, it hasn't changed you, or you haven't become like an LA person. And for everyone who lives in LA, I don't mean that in a bad way. Okay, I just mean that LA is just LA. It's Washington DC is similar, New York is similar. They're just places where like you have to keep. So, what advice would you have for someone that's moving to LA right now?
Who? Don't. No, I'm just kidding.
See, I'm leading you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is such an appropriate question, especially because our mutual friend Chris Wessling is still on my mind every day, and like such a he's a perfect example of something that I tried to be when without even really knowing that it's like Wes's influence. Like something that I always think about with Chris is like he was definitely a guy that even to the end, I don't think LA truly agree. Like he ever really saw this as like, this is where I should be, like always. That's another thing. The people who like dive all the way in and can't see LA for its flaws, I think you're going to be making a mistake there, right? Like you've got to have some self-awareness. Another Chris Wessling truism there is like, you got to be self-aware, and like knowing what LA is important too. But, Chris, definitely when he first moved here, like when I first met him, which was like right after I moved out here, he was still like not totally in on the LA experience. But the more you find your people here, you find your family, and obviously he literally found a family before passing away. And also, the guys at ATN, and I was thankful to be sort of like a fringe friend of that group as well too. That's sort of the perfect model of it. And I think that I've sort of tried to take the same perspective here and find like where my biggest like general piece of advice for people moving to LA is find like the place within it that agrees with you most, whether that's West LA or downtown LA. It probably is not gonna be downtown LA, but that might be my own personal bias speaking. Like I loved Culver City when I lived in Culver City. That was a place that I used to call my bubble. Like I was never going to leave. Actually, one of the first conversations I ever had with my now future wife, ironically, was her asking me like, so, what if, which is so funny. What if you met someone, like a girl that you really liked, and, but she was, a few miles outside of your bubble. Really, Harmon, read the signs, idiot. But I basically am like, I was like, it wouldn't work. I'm committed to the bubble. I'm not dating outside the bubble. I'm not going outside the bubble. Well, what didn't take her too long after that to pop that bubble. And now, we live down here in El Segundo, which is one of the beach cities, part of the South Bay. And like, I feel like I've reached my full like apex form here, and a lot of my friends now are down here as well, whether it's Marcus Grant, Patrick Claybon, Matt Franciscovich. Like we still talk to each other every day. Like my biggest piece of advice to people moving to LA is find your people, because they will become your family. Like most of us out here are transplants. Most of us don't have my family's all on the East Coast, right? Like that will be the case probably for the foreseeable future. Although fingers crossed, I can get the hell out of here and move back east at some point. But find your people and find the area that most agrees with you, because El Segundo is very different than downtown LA or West LA or Culver City or Santa Monica. All those all those areas are very, very different. Find the vibe that fits with you, I think is the like in some of that. And I think this is where, like you said, I feel like I've done a good job of this. Is I know who I am, I know what I'm about, and I know that I don't. My BS, I won't do a sorry Joe here, but like my BS meter is very strong. I know what is and what is not worth suffering over. And I think having a good relationship with yourself and knowing who you are is important, and finding your spot in a place like this.
Wow. That was like a perfect answer. And we got a Chris Wessling tribute in there too. There'll always be Chris Wessling. Soul. The man, he is soul, and he brought so much soul to our community, and that's why we'll always think about him. And again, I think they attributed to Banksy this idea: everyone dies twice. Once when you take your last breath, and once the last time someone says your name. And we're going to be saying Chris Wessling's name for a long time. We're going to say Reception Perception again. ReceptionPerception.com. Matt Harmon. What up, Charlie? Charlie was integral in helping civilize our Siamese, who, had to be. I didn't even realize that Opal, who you met, she was actually a little rejectorino. She had to be rehomed because she was a little too much for the first people. I didn't know that at the time. It makes me love her even more. It makes me love her.
I know. Our other rescue dog Peach was Same way. We were her second attempt at a homing. She was rehomed to us, and sometimes I'm like, I get it, but most days, most days, I'm glad that she made her way to us, because Charlie's definitely been good about showing her the ropes too. So dogs are the best. Always have dogs, never have kids. I think that you've basically told me that my entire time knowing you.
Yes. It could change the outcome of your life, just like reception perception, just like football guys, just like being a part of our football community. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. As always, free agency will continue to turn. Hope everyone's enjoying March Madness. It's a great time to be a Syracuse fan. Let's commiserate about that, folks. Hit me on Twitter if you're also enjoying the cues and everything else. As spring has sprung. Well, not officially. Is this the first day of spring? I feel like it is.
Getting close. Who knows?
You make me feel like alive, Matt Harmon. So we'll tribute spring in that way, and everyone in our audience who makes me feel alive and happy to be alive. As always, everyone, y'all are the best. We want to give you the best.